Hey everybody, today I'm going to be speaking with Drew Hamilton, wildlife photographer, wilderness guide, and conservationist. With 20 years of guiding experience in Alaska, he is an expert in brown bear biology and behaviour. Drew has led filmmakers and photographers into the wilds of Alaska to capture some of the most intimate images of bears I've ever seen. He now lives in Churchill, Canada, taking polar bear trips and leading tours to go photograph the Great Northern Lights. I have worked with Drew in Alaska and watched him work with bears, and it's truly amazing seeing somebody that in tune with their subject. And I'm really excited for you all to hear some of his stories and maybe, just maybe, learn to speak bear yourselves. Welcome to the Explore the Road podcast. Thank you very much, Drew, for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it, man.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I'm sorry it's taken us so long to catch up.
Well, you've got a lot going on. We were going to speak last week, weren't we? But you were going to do something particularly cool. Can you say?
Yeah, I think I can talk about it. So I live in Churchill, Manitoba, which is at the north end of Manitoba, right on Hudson Bay. It's most famous for polar bears. It's the self-proclaimed polar bear capital of the world. But what few people realize is we do have all three species of North American bear that occur here. And kind of the most recent arrival are grizzly bears. And so I am teaming up with a researcher to go into a national park. And this is the time of year where these grizzly bears should be coming out of dens. So we're going to go cruise around on snowmobiles, hoping to document grizzly bears in northern Manitoba. So, I'm switching it up. I started in the brown bear business and then polar bears, and now I'm getting pulled back into my grizzly bear roots. But it's really exciting, and we were supposed to be out there today, and weather.
It was brown bears originally that drew us together. I mean, a background on Drew and I. We first met 3 years ago, whilst I was filming a series for Netflix called Animal. And as part of that series, we wanted to film male grizzly brown bears competing for females in Alaska. And so to do that, we need a bear expert to make sure we don't do anything stupid, put ourselves in a compromising position with these awesome animals. That led me to Drew, and that led us working together 3 years ago.
And that was still one of the most fun shoots I've ever been on. If I remember correctly, I seem to remember we were hyper productive and got like everything we needed in the first 4 days or
Completely
something like
unheard
that.
of. It's unheard of in the wildlife game. Yeah, but we were going. I mean, in fact, we're going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about that. So, you have been working with brown bears and polar bears, but you've been working with bears for a long time, so you have many stories. Um, but I thought a good place to start would be, what was your first brown bear encounter?
Oh my. I got to go root around in the depths of my brain for this one. So I was born in Alaska, and I don't remember this, but I did go bear viewing as a child with my parents. Flew us all out to Brooks Camp, and uh, we watched the salmon jumping up the waterfall and the bears snatch. It's what everybody does. That's usually people's first introduction to brown bears, and I was 5 or something like that. So it didn't really stick with me. But the first one that I recall would have been when I went back to Alaska in the late 90s. And I went out to this place I got a job and I was working at this place in Lake Clark National Park, which is kind of out in southwest Alaska, a little further north than where we were in Katmai Park. And this camp was on the land that was owned by an old homesteader. And he'd lived out there by himself since 1967. And this was 99 or something like that. So he'd been out there a long time. And I was all excited to go see these bears. And, I had the same thoughts of what bears were that anybody else coming into that situation. I'd been exposed to all the TV and magazines and all that. And so we walk out to this meadow and everybody's kind of on edge. And I was on edge too. And we walk out and We walk up on this viewing platform, and I look down to the left, and there's Wayne, the old homesteader, and he's got a tarp spread out. And he's taken apart his outboard motor, and he's taking a nap in the middle of this meadow. And I look down, there's Wayne, and there are just bears all around. There were probably 15 bears within view. And here's this guy taking a nap. So not only was that my first kind of on the ground encounter with bears, it was my first on the ground encounter with Wayne. And it really was an eye-opening thing. I mean, it was just watching a guy take a nap, but on some level, here's this guy that's lived out here successfully for 30 plus years at that point, and maybe these bears aren't the bloodthirsty killers that they get made out to be. And so, unfortunately, that was the start of a relationship with Wayne, and a lot of what my initial interactions were based on kind of his philosophy of living with bears, and that's you leave them alone, they leave you alone, and it's kind of but he was very adept at moving and living and working around bears, and just to be able to be around that type of person set me up for a multi-decade bear career that's gone fast. I mean, I feel like I blink and suddenly I'm in Churchill surrounded by polar bears, but I guess that's just how life goes.
What was the progression to becoming a full-time wilderness guide and leading tours? How did you go from seeing the bears and being in that situation with Wayne to then becoming officially a guide and working with groups out in the wilderness?
Well, the bar for becoming a bear viewing guide is shockingly low. You need to get some insurance, so I guess you need to convince somebody that you're legit. Um, but so I just started doing it really, and so I was working for a lodge, and they put me out there with Wayne, and I got a bunch of um, on the ground experience with bears out there. And then I worked at another lodge, and then really where it took off for me was because I had this unique skill set of being on the ground with bears. I got hired by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game to work at a place called McNeil River, which is the largest congregation of brown bears anywhere on Earth. So the most brown bears I saw at one time in a quarter-mile stretch of river was 78. And so McNeil River is where bear biologists go on vacation, basically. So you got to go out there. I'd be out there all summer. I'd be out there for about 100 days, and you're watching bears all day, every day, and watching potentially dozens of bears at once with these legendary bear biologists. And I remember when I first started working there, and I was coming in, I was a little nervous because it was definitely a step up from what I'd been doing before, but it's still bears. And I was talking to my boss, the legendary bear viewing guide Tom Griffin, and he was getting me ready to go out to McNeil Falls, like we were doing our little staff training and go out to the falls where all these bears are. And he said, being a guide out here is a lot like being a hockey goalie, and your group is the goal, right? You've got the goal behind you, you've got your group, and they're just going to be bears coming at you all day, every day. And he was right. Like there were definitely days where you're like, these, and they're not necessarily coming at you, they're just moving around in space and time, and they happen to be coming in your direction, and it happens fast. And so you just got to be like in front of the group, kick save, send that bear off that way, send that bear off that way. And there were days you're having to do that 20 or 30 times. Like it's just nonstop. And so you learn very quickly to be able to read that bear's behavior and react appropriately to achieve an outcome that keeps the group safe, keeps the bears safe, but doesn't displace the bears. You just want to move them enough to where everybody, both parties involved, are out of harm's way, right? And so, yeah, so we come back at the end an end of day of guiding, and we'd be debriefing in the cabin or saying, oh, I had 4 kick saves today or whatever. So while I was working there, one of our fish technicians, because I was working for a state department of fish and game, one of our fish techs would come in and do fisheries research, and he said, hey, you want to see some polar bears? And this would have been in about probably 2013, somewhere in there. And I said, heck yeah, I want to see some polar bears. He said, well, you got to meet my wife. And she was working for a company that did tours here in Churchill. And so I signed up with them, and I ended up leaving the state department and doing some brown bear tours in Alaska. And that's where we met up. And then I started doing polar bears as kind of this side thing because the seasons lined up and went brown bears right into polar bears. Um, and then I met my current business partner, Alex. We were both working for the same company, and we said, well, we'd like to do this a little different. We'd like to do it on the ground. We'd like to do it our way. And so he started this company, Discover Churchill, in 2018 with just one guy and a Toyota 4Runner that could take out a couple people, to where now we're running, we've got staff, we're running 4.5 seasons a year, basically. So we've got some shoulder season stuff, and we do polar bears, we do northern lights, we do beluga whales, we do birds, a little bit of everything.
And
And
well,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, for people who don't understand what a brown bear season is, um, what with regards to the bear's biology is kind of peak season for you to go and see brown bears?
So the life of a brown bear over the course of the summer is quite varied, actually, and they can move around quite a lot. It starts in early June. Actually, when we went out, we were out there in late May. We were kind of the first ones out, and there were definitely some bears poking around. They've come out of their dens at that point, and they're not super hungry. It often gets portrayed that they come out of the dens just ravenous, which is not necessarily the case because they're just coming out of um, this torpor, really. They're in this lowered metabolic state, so they're kind of lumbering around, and they'll eat some sedge or this protein-rich grass-like plant, and then it rolls right into mating season. So June is peak mating season, and I think about that fight sequence we got would have been in probably the first couple days in June, maybe, or even maybe the end of May, but early June seems about right. Um, and so that was kind of the very first gauntlet thrown down for mating season that year. And mating, they're seasonal breeders, so mating season will go about a month. So call it June, late May, early July, mostly June. And so that's when hormones peak. That's when the pheromones are floating on the breeze. The big males are particularly charged up. They those pheromones that the females are putting off go right into their brain. They can't think about anything else. They're really not eating a whole lot then because they are so singular in their focus, and that's when the big brawls happen. That's also the time when the super cute little cubs come out. And thinking back to that year, I think we saw the first Cubs of the year roll out on the 6th or 7th of June, right in there, if I remember correctly. So we got a little bit of both, and then they'll spend that first part of the summer grazing on this sedge. And as the summer progresses, and that sedge gets taller and taller and gets cooked in the sun, it starts to lose its nutritional value. It's surprisingly high in protein in its early stages. But that roughly lines up with the fish runs starting in that part of the world, and so um, that spot in particular is unique in that there are fish runs that come up. It's on this peninsula, so there are fish runs that come up from both sides of the peninsula, and so some bears will stay. Um, so, for example, where we were, it's this huge sedge meadow, so there's lots of food early season, but the fish runs in that bay aren't strong enough to support that number of bears, so they move to other places where the fish runs are stronger. Some of them won't even cross over the mountains. There are bears that we would see a little further north than where we were, um, that I would see at the beginning part of the summer, and then I would see them 40 miles away. I would see the same bears over the mountains. They've crossed over the divide and come down the other side to fish for the Bristol Bay sockeye run. So the bears, that's what they do. They find food once the sex hormones have calmed down, and then they're just on the search for food, and that'll go um, into it can vary, go into maybe late November, in some places. The bears will still be, and this torpor, this denning, the only the pregnant females have to go into the den. For other bears, it's just a mechanism. Brown bears, it's just a mechanism for getting through the lean times. Like if it's a mild winter on, say, like Kodiak Island, or some of the other places in that area, um, they might not go in at all. If they can find enough food, they don't. They're bears. They do what they want.
And when you are in these spots, so it's peak bear season. You're in the meadow. You've got your group with you. The goal, as you mentioned before, and you were saying that you've got all these bears in one place, and you're deflecting them. And for a lot of people, to be like, well, a bear is bigger than you. A bear is going to do what it wants to do. So when you say you deflect bears, what exactly are you doing? You've got a bear coming towards you. How do you communicate with that bear to make it not walk straight through your group?
Well, on simple level is sometimes it's just reminding them that you're there. Like they don't want to have a confrontation with you either, and they're just trying to go about their business. And so it might be just a matter of giving them if you step forward, that makes them take a step wider, and they go around sideways. They're communicating through body language, and we as a people have, I think, lost our ability collectively to interpret how these animals are trying to communicate with you. So every brown bear interaction, or every polar bear interaction, every black bear interaction, um, it's a dialogue, it's a conversation. It's back and forth. And so the bears are excellent communicators. They'll tell you exactly what's on their mind, and you just have to be smart enough to figure out what they're saying and work with them to come up with an outcome that works for both parties involved. It's a negotiation. You're back and forth, but you're negotiating from the point, there's some understandings that bears don't naturally see humans as food. Um, we are uh, we are they give us more credit than perhaps we deserve when we're out there. Because we are predators too. We've got forward facing eyes. You can smell the ham sandwich we stalked and killed for lunch. Uh, it's we've got a lot of street cred that we might not even realize out there. And a lot of with bears too is owning your space. When they say, don't run from a bear, it's not just running. It's don't yield ground necessarily, unless there are situations where that might be more ideal. But you own that spot. You're not going to let bears in. They can work around, and it's every bear encounter is a little different. So it does take some history and some background to be able to read and determine what that bear wants and then react appropriately. Um, but yeah, it's body language. And you do it long enough, and it does get to be second nature. Really, there are certain things you might not even realize you're doing, whether it's body orientation, or whether it's say a bear is approaching a group, and say there are multiple people there with you, but you're the one that's going to be interacting with that bear, hopefully. So the first thing you need to do is you need to single yourself out as the one in control of that situation. And so you'll need to stand up or do something so that bear goes from taking the whole group in to now it's focused on you, and say, okay, we're going to be the ones talking here, and we'll figure this situation out. Because some situations they're curious, some situations they're just trying to get around you. One of the always the one of the more, and this was kind of your first introduction to brown bear, was the old pick and roll move
Yeah.
that Peaches pulled on us. One of the things that the females, that particularly the older, more savvy ones, uh, they will try to use the groups or the people as a diversion from a big male that's hot to trot right on their tail. And so they'll come like right up to the group and then they'll just zip around behind you. So suddenly you've got a female that's pumping out pheromones behind you, and you've got this all charged up male on the other side of you. And it's your job to say, hey, go around.
And it with female bears, because that's something that they do quite often. This is what because I was one of those people too. Working in wildlife TV, you know you're going to encounter, hopefully, you're going to encounter lots of different kinds of animals in different parts of the world. And there were a few animals which are on effectively my deadly list. Animals that I would love to see, but I would never want to be in their environment on ground level with them, because the fact of the matter is the result would be death, and it would be my death, not theirs. And bears were on that list. I was like, I appreciate what a brown bear is, a black bear, polar bear, but they're an animal I don't want to see on foot because I will die. And I did zoology at university, but it's such a crazy concept to think that you can stand and share close space, with this ultimate predator. Bears were on that list. Crocodiles are still on that list. I do not want to come face to face with a crocodile in the water. Um, and yeah, and tigers are still on there. But working with you, and on other shoots, it was amazing to me that the each bear has its own personality, and depending on that bear's personality, one depends how it's going to look at you, depending on what stage in its life, that if it's a mother, if it's a young juvenile, if it's a big male, that will then alter how they perceive you. And the fascinating behavior that you told me about was how females who have young cubs, how they use humans when they don't want attention from male bears. Can you explain that dynamic to people?
Yeah, so I guess we should take a step back before we get into that, and look at the reasons we can interact with bears in that area. So potentially in close proximity. And so there's a process called habituation, which is it's through a process of repeated benign interaction. So these bears, and in that part of the world now, it's generational. The cubs, they learn as cubs that humans are not a threat, that they're not a food source, that they are, if done correctly, essentially neutral, relatively neutral parts of the environment. So there are actually three types of habituation that are going on in a scenario like that. And so the first one is bear habituation. And so that is bears that exist in a dense enough concentration that they're used to communicating with other creatures. They're used to communicating with other bears. So the next is bear human habituation. So if they're used to interacting with bears all day, humans should be relatively easy, right? So they're already primed. They've got communication skills from interacting with one another that transfers to humans. And then the third step is human bear habituation, and that is us getting over our preconceived notions to be able to interact in a way that these bears find predictable, which bears like predictability. And so it's those three forces at work that allow all these interactions. And so there are certain female bears in places like that have kind of taken it a step further and exhibit a behavior called refuging, where they will actually seek out humans as shelter from other bears. And it works up to a point, but eventually you find another bear that's just as habituated as they are. But the humans just provide a certain level of stability. It's not uncommon for them to come close and then take a nap in close proximity, because they know you're essentially babysitting for them. So nothing's going to come through you. So you are the rock wall. You've got their six in some regards. And it varies with different females. We had a female, she would literally leave her cubs at our feet, and then she'd go fish a half mile away. Like you'd lose sight of her, and you're like, well, what are we supposed to? I'm not getting paid enough to babysit too. What am I, changing diapers here? Like no. Um, No, and that is, it comes back to just how individual each of these creatures uh, is. Like it's that mom has figured out that humans are not a threat, that we're neutral, and that nothing's coming through us, and they use that to their advantage. They're very smart. You know, they're figuring out how to deal with that harsh environment that they happen to be sharing with humans as well.
It was honestly one of those things when I experienced it when we were in Hallow Bay in Katmai. Um, it was great, and it was also a bit of a nightmare because I do remember there was a female. She would walk up to us. I think she had three cubs, and I think they were second year cubs. They weren't cubs of the year. They'd been in the den with her, and they'd come out this year. And she would come over to us, and as you said, she knew that nothing was going to be coming from our side. So what she would do, she would graze, but she would always be looking away from us because she wasn't worried about us. And on one hand, I thought, how amazing is that? This female with cubs, which everyone says, I mean, females with cubs are incredibly protective of their cubs, and so can be particularly dangerous depending on the situation if you surprise them and they don't know you're there. But in this particular population, where this female had, she knew that we weren't a threat to her, and we were in the open, she'd seen us from miles away. She actively would come over, and just because she wasn't worried, she'd be looking away from us, and it was lovely. I was like, oh, she trusts us, she's not worried about us. That's an amazing thing. But in terms of from filmmaking perspective, it was a nightmare because all we were filming was a backside the whole time, and that was just, it was an amazing experience. Another thing that happened when we were filming in Hallow Bay, and I'll post a link to that interaction in the description, but was when, different situation. We were out on the beach, and there was a young male following a female, and there was another female behind us, and he was just a bit charged up. And can you remember that altercation or that interaction, and how it played out? Can you tell people?
He wasn't a subadult. I mean, he was an adult bear, but he was young, and he was kind of early on the scene, so thinking he had some game before the truly big boys showed. Before the he was the undercard, before the heavyweight bout shows up.
Yeah, so he was following one female, and then the other female was walking behind us, and he just turned, and he was just beelining directly towards us. And I, at the time, because he was quite far away, we'd been closer to other bears previously on the shoot, even though we hadn't been there that long. Um, and so for me, this bear, younger bear, smaller bear, was still quite far away. But instantly, you were like, oh, if you take this tripod, I just need to have my hands free. The situation dynamic was instantly something which, oh, this is totally different. And he was, walking towards us, jaw popping. Um, which I knew at the time after we'd had conversations like that is kind of, as a more aggressive kind of behavior. Or, I mean, is aggression the right word? How would you describe jaw popping?
It's just showing that they're worked up, that their energy is already elevated, that they think something's going on, and they might be trying to figure out what the scenario is. It's just kind of an elevated level of excitement.
And he
So
was, and you just stepped across and you just said, "Hey, buddy, close enough," and you just said that we'd been closer to other bears and we hadn't need to say anything, but because of that difference in situation, different individual, different stage of life, just required a slightly different kind of deflection. And he did. He just took a step and just walked around us, walked straight past us.
he had different motivations. He had other. I think up till that point, all the bears we'd really been interacting with had been grazing or digging clams or doing, foraging in some regard. And here, he's got something else on his mind altogether that doesn't involve us. We just happen to be there of all the places we could have been. We were there. We were there first. And so yeah, he was trying to get to that female that must have been putting off some pheromones or something. And So as he's coming, like any time a North American bear anyway is coming towards you, it thinks it knows what is going to happen. You know, they're very risk averse, and so it's all about just gradual escalation, incremental escalation of response until you get the response from them that you need. And so for him, it just took, stepping forward a little bit and checking him, and all he had to do was deviate by a few degrees and then just continue on his way. Uh,
No, it was an awesome awesome interaction, and the 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 variation of interactions we had throughout that time. We also had much closer quarters later on. A massive male bear, and he was walking straight towards us, but I was instantly more nervous. And yeah, do you remember that interaction? Can how come you were so calm with the bigger, larger male bear and slightly more assertive with the younger bear?
he was just wandering essentially, and he had his nose down, he had his head down, and he's just following this scent trail that had been left by another bear that had passed relatively close to us. And with that one, it was just reminding him that we're, or letting him know that we're there. Like he was so focused on those, scents going into his brain. It's kind of counterintuitive, but I would much rather deal with a big old bear than a subadult or a young adult bear. You don't get to be a big old bear by messing around with people, essentially. Like that bear knows the drill. We were not the first people. I mean, he's been living there for 20 years. I'm just guessing. Just throw that out there. 18 to 20 years. Like he was prime. And yeah, it was just a subtle reminder that we're here. Like, hey, just go around, buddy. Um, so I did have the top popped off my flare. It's just that, and that's actually just muscle memory. If there's going to be a bear within, X amount of distance, I just have that flare ready to deploy. Whether or not I think I'm going to use it or not, it's always ready to go. But yeah, that's all he needed was just a reminder.
And a lot of people ask me, they say, "Oh, you must you must have a gun with you. Obviously, you wouldn't be there. You must have a gun when you're filming around grizzly bears." And they're so shocked when I say, "Oh, no, no. With this particular population, we have bear spray and a flare."
Oh, maybe you guys made me carry bear spray.
But this is the thing. So different bear populations, um, depending on their level of habituation, some places you would go, and it would be wiser to carry a gun if you are traversing through a particularly wild part of Alaska. You don't know what the population of bears is like when it comes to people, but when you're filming in Hallow Bay, where with bears that have seen people wandering around for 20 years, you know that you don't need to have that level of protection with you.
Well, this is gonna sound un-American of me, but I'm not necessarily a fan of guns, um, for a bear deterrent. I'm of the philosophy that once somebody goes out into the field with a gun, you are now the most dangerous thing out there to yourself and everyone around you. Um, I've I've gone through a lot of tactical firearms training. I've gone through, I'm a hunter myself. I'm very familiar with firearms. I'm very familiar with, but I'm also very familiar with bears. And I know that the situation where you would need a gun is going to happen so fast that the likelihood that you are going to deploy that firearm effectively is very low. If you were successful in killing that bear, you probably didn't need to kill that bear, kind of thing. And on some level, I guess a shotgun is a tool. You can put other things through them. You can put cracker shells, you can put Whistler shells, but um, in my experience, the things that you can deploy the fastest are going to be the most successful. And so, what I've settled on are these marine flares, and we talked, guides all talk amongst themselves, and um, the folks that like the flares will preach the gospel of flares ad nauseum. um, it's they're better in windy situations. They're easier to transport. Yeah, I just much prefer the flares. And so, like in a bear situation, and we kind of talked about it a little earlier, when that bear is coming towards you, uh, it thinks it knows what's going to happen, and you run through your incremental protocols and ratchet it up, and then the flare is the nuclear option, because they're in that situation. There are two kinds of risk for the bear. There's perceived risk and there's actual risk, and their actual risk is relatively unchanged. We are still but mere humans, right? But what we're trying to control in that situation is their perceived risk. And so if you can throw something at them, again, they think they know what the outcome is going to be. If you can throw something at them that is completely unexpected, like nobody expects a fireball, right? And we're not, again, we're these are marine flares, so they burn for about 2.5 minutes. They're not the projectiles, because then you're just shooting it behind the bear and then comes towards you. So it's a fireball in your hand that takes less than a second to deploy. And then there's a lot of audio with it. It's this big, loud, there's the visual, there's the sound. And then you didn't accidentally shoot someone. So there are many benefits of not getting shot. Is one of the main benefits of not having a firearm.
You must have over, all of your trips, you must have had some unbelievable encounters. How many times have you had to deploy a flare? Have you ever had to deploy a flare?
Uh, just once on a polar bear, actually, in over 20 years. Now I've sprayed a couple bears using bear spray, but they were in the early 2000s, and if I knew then what I know now, probably wouldn't have done it. But bear spray is great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not poo pooing bear spray. Like there are situations, if I were, say in a particularly flammable environment, flares might not be the right. But in that coastal environment where we were, it was it was the best choice.
I remember you did a demonstration for us when we were on the boat before we hit land, and I mean, yeah, I've never seen a flare go off, and it was loud, it was bright, it was an intense thing. So I can imagine with an animal that has unbelievably acute senses, that would just be times 50. So I mean, yeah, one of the things that I say before we go out on every shoot is there are three priorities. The first priority is everyone's health and safety. Nobody wants to get injured, filming the animals. We want to get the shot, but not at that cost. The other priority, top priority, is the animals' welfare. There's no point going out and filming these things and negatively affecting them as a result. Then the third priority is the actual shoot itself. So if you're compromising one or two to get the shot, then you've got to kind of rethink what you're doing. And that is, that's for us, having you there, it allows us to focus on the shot. So the camera operator for that shoot was Pete, and so he can be looking down the lens, focusing on the composition. I am then looking outside of what Pete can see, just to give him, oh, there's another bear coming in from the left-hand side of frame, just so you know. So he's not taken off guard by anything outside of that viewfinder, because they get so focused on the viewfinder. And then we can only do that because we work with people like you who are constantly monitoring the wild situation around us. And if like, oh, by the way, guys, you need to stop filming, we need to move back, we need to do that, you're across that. And it's an unbelievable skill. Witnessing it firsthand was amazing. Do you have like kind of a top three? I mean, I imagine you get asked this a lot, but do you have like a top three encounters or like an ultimate encounter that you'll never forget?
I think the ones that come to mind most readily, it wasn't necessarily a single encounter, but um, there were a few nights where I was out with some researchers at McNeil Falls, and there are just three of us sitting there, and it's potentially a stormy, like we're sitting there in store, we got all our rain gear on, and, gulls flying everywhere, and you've got 40, 50, 60, 70 bears all around you, 360 degrees around you. Um, and and this raging river in front of you, just the amount of energy um, that is in that type of place um, is something they'll stay with you as long as you can remember. Uh, so yeah, it's those nights, and I don't even have particularly specific memories of bear interactions. It's just being in that place at that time, and sharing that with just two other humans, really. Um, we we set up chairs on, so we're on this like little gravel pad. There are no fences or anything. We're just have this gravel pad and this big rock wall behind us, and so we had to set up these camp chairs on either end because the bears were coming in so tight that they'd turn that corner, and if we didn't set the chairs were just to make them go a little wider before they turned in. And so they wouldn't just run into us because they're chasing each other and running off with fish and things like that, and they're so focused on themselves, and that's the way it should be. Is we should just be we're trying to achieve fly on the wall status, and then these other scenarios we talk about with flares and stuff like that are just when things go a little off plan. Oh, okay. I got one. So we're in this place. It was a couple bays down from where we were. And it's a little tiny place, and it's this bay it's run by female bears. I've only seen a couple male bears in there ever, and they were usually moving pretty fast to get out of there. And it'd been a poor fish run that year, and so the bears were a little hungry, and they were wandering around. They'd eaten as many berries and sedges as they could stand, and we happened to be there when the first slug of salmon hit. And there was this mom with a cub, and she'd stashed the cub over on the other side of us, and she catches the first salmon, and she brings it over, and she's eating it right at our feet. And while we're there, this other more dominant, the alpha female bear from that bay comes rolling in. She wants to steal that fish, and so she comes in, and this is all happening like 3 feet in front of me. So she comes in, and so the one mom is trying to eat this fish as fast as she can, and this other more dominant female comes in and is just doing this that you hear it, but you feel it. Like it's loud enough and deep enough. It's in your chest that you're feeling this. And and these are two very comfortable bears with people. And, and they were about to get in a brawl, like right there. And so what I had to do was one, yell and scream to get their attention. I had to redirect their attention from each other to me. So now they're both like, whoa, what's going on? This once stoic human who just sits there is now we need to pay attention to him. And then I had to walk towards the dominant female to get her to circle around behind, and that left an opening for the mom with the fish to run off in that direction. And so just had to give enough space for that mom to get out of there so they didn't get in a fight like right at our feet. um, that one was exciting.
Man, that sounds intense. Because whenever we were with the bears, I mean, we were out there for 3 weeks, and yeah, I mean, we did see two huge males have a massive fight, but that was about, I don't know, 40 meters away from us. But
That was just right.
yeah, I
That's
remember,
about
yeah,
right.
thinking I wouldn't want that to happen any closer, because the how quickly they went from two big, yeah, they're posturing, they're lumbering around, into just the power, the speed. Then one flipped the other one over. If you haven't checked it out, it's on Netflix, the Bears episode, and you can see this fight between these two males. It was just came out of nowhere, and so that's the thing, that the change in tone of that bear was just insane. I can't imagine what it'd be like to be any closer than 40 meters to a situation like that.
You know what was so interesting about our shoot together? And, I wanted you guys to be able to get a variety of shots and things like that and different locations, but it seemed like there was that one magic spot. You remember that rock that was in the middle of the meadow? And we just ended up like, we could have done that whole thing just sitting in one spot, and the bears were just coming to us. Like, really. It helped that there was a glacier and mountains and volcanoes and stuff in the background, but, like, it was just yeah, rarely do things come together, as nicely as
No,
that.
it is rare. I can tell you now, having tried to film animal behaviors for the last 10 years, you never get things in the first week and have 2 weeks to twiddle your thumbs. That just never, ever happens. I still can't believe it did happen.
Eating food on the boat.
Yeah, living on a boat for 3 weeks and then traveling into the meadows every day by a smaller little rib, and then having to walk 25 meters to then see your subject. That's such a contrast to some of the other shoots that I've done. I did another shoot straight after that one, which was quite literally the polar opposite, walking 23 kilometers a day to film a dark animal in a dark jungle for 45 days. It was the most brutal thing I've ever done. So yeah, I had like the best shoot of my life and then one of the toughest shoots of my life. And yeah, so that situation, you had bears incredibly close to you, and that was a high energy situation. But there's a clip online, and I'm sure people listening will have seen it. All you need to type into YouTube is "bear sits down next to man," and that's your clip. And yeah, can you explain that clip to people and what happened?
That was at McNeil Falls, and that was a highly habituated male bear that, every day that he had been to McNeil Falls, there'd been a small group of well-behaved humans sitting there doing the same thing, to the point that he had just woken up from a nap, which was right behind us, and he wanted to get a look at the river, and we're sitting in this high spot, so he came and sat right next to me, and that he did that all the time. I remember thinking, "Oh, my buddy John will be jealous," was what I was really thinking at the time, and then, he was a fascinating bear. He wasn't a very dominant bear. He was pretty big. He was unique in that well, we would use him for the 1,000-pound standard. So, most of these bears have never been handled, and so it turns out, most bear experts even were underestimating their weights. But that bear, we called him Ears because he has these big giant ear muffs, and, he had gotten tagged by researchers, and so they actually weighed him, and in the fall and this had been a number of years prior, he weighed 960 pounds as a young adult, and so we just kind of roughed it out. We used him for the 1,000-pound standard, and in the 6 years that I was at McNeil, um, he he would and it was nice because he would move around and stand next to other bears, so you could compare sizes, and in those years, it was we were getting some peak really high numbers of bears, and he wasn't in the top 40, I would say. Like, it was those years were skewed to more and more male bears, and yeah, he wasn't in the top 40.
So, so what would be, you know, what would be like say top 10, like a big male brown bear, like height wise and weight wise? What we talking?
I've never tried to pick one up. That's the problem. You gotta lift with your legs. It's very,
Straight back.
very complicated, but so, you kinda try to compare them to yourself. And so one of the biggest bears I've ever seen, he was relatively taller and he'd walk by pretty close. And a couple times he walked by, and I remember thinking his, like the top of his hump, brown bears have that hump on their shoulders. His hump was like just below my collarbones. And so, like, he's just a wall of a bear. and uh, we didn't have any measuring devices or anything, but we tried to measure his tracks. And so this guy Larry that I worked with had a comb in his pocket, and so he left a print. And so we measured his back print. His back, the pad on his back foot was 11 and a half inches long, or
Wow.
two combs, because we used the comb to measure it and laid it out.
The official
It was not
unit of bear
it was not
foot
scientific.
size.
I think it's, don't you guys, you're in Europe, don't you use combs to measure everything? I
Of
don't know.
course, of course. Doesn't everybody?
But yeah, he was just a massive bear, and he lived to be 30 years old. Um, he because they had a data set going back on him, and he disappeared in his uh, yeah, he was 30 basically when he disappeared. And it's unusual for a big bear to live that long. Um, but he was very non-confrontational. He was very good at fishing, and other bears would target him. And when he'd catch a fish, they, another bear would come in and steal it. He'd just go catch another one. Like, he got big through efficiency, and he lived a long time by avoiding conflict. Like a lot of, yeah, a lot gets put on, alpha bears and this, that, and the alpha bears don't live as long. That's a tough life trying to keep all those other bears in check. And yeah, so old Luther, he was a good bear.
Luther, strong name, strong name. Well, and with the proximity you have to bears, because you are a sensational photographer, and was that
Thank you.
something that you did before you started guiding, or was it you were guiding and then you noticed, actually I could start taking pictures here? How did photography become part of your life?
It started as a kid, actually. My parents owned a small town newspaper, and so I had free run of the dark room. And then my mom gave me her old AE1 camera, and I could go in and roll my own film and develop the photo. I couldn't touch the stacks of new photo paper, but any scrap. So I'd make like L-shaped collages and a lot of like long, skinny, scrap. I don't know, arts and crafts, whatever I was doing, but it was super. I can still conjure the chemical smells of the dark room. And then I kind of stepped away from it until I went back and started hanging out with brown bears. And then I just went with whatever camera I could afford. So I'll be, uh, shooting. Yeah, it was like an old Canon A720 or something. Like, I was stoked because it had a flip screen. And I could do all these angles and stuff like that. And I don't even know where all those pictures are. But so my buddy and I, we were working at this field camp, and uh, there was an electric fence around the guest tents, and the guests thought that the electric fence was to keep the bears out, but it was actually to keep the guests in. Because when we turned on that electric fence at 10 o'clock, we had the whole place to ourselves. People are scared to death of electric fences, and so we'd lock them in and we'd turn on the fence, and then we'd go out and watch bears. And we'd go down. We knew what the tides were, and so we knew when the bears would show up relative to the tides, and uh, we'd go sit there cross-legged, just a little ways up from the stream, and you'd go out about 10 minutes before the bears would usually show up, and you're just sitting there. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the tide would hit a certain stage, and all these bears would just start coming out, and you're just sitting there cross-legged, like, bears walk, they look at you and just keep walking right by. Oh man, that was a long time ago.
the well, in those situations, so how do you think photography has, um, has it given you a slightly different view on the bears that you're viewing? Do you look at them in a slightly different way, or have you noticed that the more pictures you take, do you see different characteristics that you might not have seen if you were guiding without taking pictures?
I forgot that your original question was about photography when I went off on my tangent there. But anyway, I think there is an advantage for being as familiar with bears as I am, because I feel like I have a tendency to notice the moments and the behaviors that are a little more subtle. perhaps, whether it's just a look or a moment between a mom and a cub that gets lost in you know 24 hours a day is full of moments, and you can only capture so many. And it's the ones that might be a little less interesting, but can still be presented in an interesting way. So those are the ones that I like the most. I have a lot of images that I like where the bears are looking at the camera, but the ones that I enjoy the most are the ones where the bear is going about its business as if you're not even there. You might They might not even have the eyes of the animal in the image, but for a photographer, I feel that that should, and there's a place for other stuff too, but that should always be the goal, is to be so unobtrusive that the bear doesn't have to be looking at you, or the wildlife. It's not just bears, and wildlife doesn't have to be looking at you. And that's when you capture the true moments of what it is to be a bear, when they are so comfortable with you just a little ways away doing nothing but watching. um, those are the moments that make bears bears.
Awesome. I mean, yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. I think what I love about photography is, yeah, just for me, it gives me a totally different perspective on an animal. When you're looking with your eyes, you can take in the whole thing, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But what a lens does for me is it just focuses me on that one particular moment in this huge scene that's going on. I'm focusing right on that one, I'm just waiting for that claw to move into frame, or I want her to lift her back foot up so I can see the pad as they're walking away, like all that sort of stuff. It kind of hones you into this one little moment, and then you kind of stop taking pictures, then you're back, and then you're looking at the whole space again. And being in these wild spaces allows you to appreciate wild spaces more. And bears have given us a lot of leeway in these spots. They're letting us share the space with them, and we are seeing how wonderful this environment is. But it is under threat from development, and you were a huge voice protecting Bristol Bay from development. What well, I'm talking about the Pebble Mine. So, what was going to happen to Bristol Bay?
Well, so Bristol Bay is the area on the west side of the mountains, on the Alaska Peninsula, and it is home to the largest remaining wild sockeye salmon fishery on the planet. Tens of millions of fish return every year. I think the record's 60 plus million fish, and it's unique, um, because it's the last. There used to be runs like that all up and down the West Coast, and we've kind of whittled it down through development and just human nature, essentially, to these last strongholds of salmon. And it is also home to the largest copper deposit in the world, and so known copper deposit in the world. And there was a push to develop it right at the headwaters of this Bristol Bay fishery. And it's wrong to develop this on so many levels. People have been living in that area for tens of thousands of years, subsisting on these salmon. They are the driver of the ecosystem. There is a sustainable salmon fishery already that produces billions of dollars a year. Um, and then the footprint is not just, they would try to present it as, oh, we're just going to make this little airport sized hole in the ground. But really, the way the hydrology works out there, your little airport sized hole would cover, could potentially impact an area the size of the state of Ohio, because it's all water out there. And then it's in a place that the actual act of digging a hole would produce acid, sulfuric acids that would have to be maintained in perpetuity. And in their own plan, they said, "Well, you will have to maintain this tailings pond forever." And there's a 0.0001 chance that this earthen tailings dam, is going to fail. Well, you take 0.00000001 times infinity, it's going to fail and it's going to destroy everything. It's going to destroy the future of that place will be changed forever. And so what I was trying to do was get people to look at it from, and I was just one part of a multi-pronged conservation effort between uh, native tribes, fishing interests, environmental. I mean, a lot of hunting group, a lot of different people came together to really fight this mine, and ultimately it did get defeated. It's still kind of kicking around in the courts, and I still get emails about it every now and again. But essentially, it's been defeated. It was vetoed by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and then the actual nail in the coffin of Pebble Mine. Was the good people of the native village of Pedro Bay on the north side of Lake Iliamna. They put thousands of acres into conservation status, but in a big screw you to Pebble Mine, they didn't do it in a nice circle or a square. They did this long, skinny strip that blocks off any road access to the places that they would need to get for this mine. So it's essentially dead. And yeah, it was a wild ride, but I'm just glad we won because it could have there were times there where it was pretty grim.
And this is the thing, you don't often hear of effectively the little guy, winning in a fight like that, because they have so much money and so much uh, power and backing from, I presume, government bodies to, because it is going to be very profitable for a lot of people. So to actually win on something of that scale, and your pictures, I'm right in thinking you were awarded the Houseberry Wilderness Image Award.
The Daniel Hausberg Award from the Alaska Conservation Foundation.
Yeah,
So
and
they
so
were
your images
thoughtful enough
were,
to give me of all the people that worked so hard on that. They chose me, and so it was quite the honor to have my work. And then, frankly, all credit to the models. The bears really told the story better than I could.
and that's one of the things I think, images of animals and these wildernesses. There are a lot of people who won't get the chance to see these places, and if you can open people's eyes with photography, I think you can get results like this. You bring it to a wider audience, and effectively, hopefully that protects it in the long run for everybody.
Well, it's safe for now. I'll keep you posted.
I mean, and so you've done all this with brown bears, and now you are working with polar bears a lot of the time. What is, because even in my circles you hear, oh yeah, brown bears, you can walk with brown bears. Polar bears, different kettle of fish. They actively hunt you. So what's the truth in those kind of rumors, in terms of what's it like working with polar bears?
They don't really hunt you. I think oftentimes a curious bear gets their behavior is misrepresented by human interpretation. Um, but so I'm in Churchill, and so we're watching these bears on land, right? So we watch them in the ice-free period once they come off the sea ice, and they are bored out of their minds. So these are highly intelligent creatures. They make life and death decisions on a daily basis. Um, when we watch brown bears, they're all business, right? They've got a job, they've got to eat, they've got to mate, they got to do whatever is on their outlook calendar for the day. They got to get that done. The polar bears around here they're bored. They're wandering around. They're following their noses. They're looking for a snack or whatever they can find. And so they are potentially more curious. They'll come check you out. They'll say, oh, what's that smell? I wouldn't. They're not looking at us as prey, but one bear that I was like, oh, one polar bear where I'm like, no, I don't want to be anywhere near that bear.
And what was it about that bear that made it kind of a bit more kind of keep that one at a distance?
He was a very old, starving bear. And ultimately, he took off after another bear, and conservation tranquilized him and put him in our polar bear holding facility, and never heard from him again. Like he was on his way out, and he was desperate. And it's hard to watch bears like that. Your heart goes out to them, but it is a normal part of every bear's life. They will get to that point eventually. That's how most of them would go, I'd imagine. But in terms of interact, we just don't take as many uh, risks. And risks isn't even the right word. Um, we just always have some place to fall back, kind of thing. So, like the way we do it is we've got 4-wheel drive vans, and we're cruising around on these old military uh, trails, essentially. And where we get our good stuff is, we've got an excellent staff who are very good at interpreting and predicting, because everybody says bears are unpredictable, and I'm going to tell you the opposite. Bears are very predictable and anticipating their next move. And so you don't need to go get right up in their business. You just, hey, that bear, 10 minutes from now, that bear is going to be right there. And so we should be there 7 minutes from now and beat them there, and then they can just walk right by. And because again, you're trying to achieve that kind of neutral status. So if you're already there and waiting and a bear walks by, that's going to be the most natural interaction you're going to get. um, People have a tendency to want to get closer, and that all has to be done on the bear's terms. And so you're just going to force them into these unnatural situations by crowding them. So you just need to be a little patient, and your patience will be rewarded.
Well, you mentioned then that, very casually, oh, we've got a polar bear holding facility. And I think it's one of those things to mention that, when we were filming in Hallow Bay in Katmai, we've traveled to get to that location. We boarded a boat. We had 13-hour boat ride to then get to the bay. We were then living on the boat. We were then in the national park, and we were very much in kind of the bears' territory. Effectively, we were out in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness. It was amazing. I will actually. I was mentioning to you before. I'm editing together that whole trip, the film from that whole trip, which I'll be posting soon on YouTube. But the polar bears in Churchill, it's a slightly different dynamic, right? You're not exactly having to go very far to see polar bears necessarily.
No, there was one 2 blocks from here yesterday. The first bear of the season turned up. It's a wild time right now. So we've got first polar bear showed up in town yesterday. We've got a pack of 10 wolves over across the river right now that have been popping in and out. I'm about to go on this adventure looking for grizzly bears in the national park because they're coming out. The bay is just starting to break up. There's some open water out there. So these bears, I don't know, in the next couple months, they're going to start popping back. Uh, we'll probably get the occasional bear here and there uh, for the next couple months, but then they'll be back in earnest. And it's been fascinating watching, because so much of Churchill gets put, the marketing of Churchill is October and November. You got to be here, as these bears are here from July on. I mean, last year they were here in June. And so watching these polar bears all summer is just fascinating. And so, they get most of their eating done out on the ice. They're eating seals. But the last couple of years, we've been watching these bears just nailing geese. So, like, it's not enough to stave off, they need the seals. They need that, the fat calories and things like that. But like, I watched a big male polar bear demolish a whole goose family one day. He got the adults first, and then the goslings were just sitting there, and he just systematically ate all these geese. And then a couple years ago, there was this female, big fat female that was probably going to go into the den and have babies, and she was so efficient because these geese go through this flightless period, right, where they're molting. And she would steer them. She was walking the whole time. She never had to run. She would steer them into these ponds, and then they couldn't get out. And then she could just pick them up. Like, it's crazy. Seeing how these bears adapt to life on land, but knowing it's not enough. But just seeing how they do it is kind of fast. And watching, in like August, September, we're watching they're eating berries. Um, we've watched them catch a couple seals right off the shore. We get dead belugas will wash up. That's always exciting. You get wolves and wolverines and stuff show up when that happens. But it's all just right out. I can drive 15 minutes and I'll be there.
I walk out of my front door here in the UK, and I don't really worry about seeing anything. Maybe I'll see a fox, I might see a badger if I'm lucky. Do you genuinely have to check for polar bears when you leave your house at certain times of the year?
Hmm. Yeah, we just always these flares. I've been preaching the gospel of flares. We just have flares in all our. Actually, my daughter's diaper bag has a flare in
Of course,
it. Just you never know when you're
essential
going to
diaper
need it.
care. Uh,
And actually, yesterday, after that bear turned up, I threw a flare in my pocket before I left the house today.
uh, your daughter, I mean, she's young, evidently, still in diapers. Um, have you taken her out to see any bears? She come out with you on any of your adventures?
Yep, we go out in the summertime. Last summer, we went out every day from basically June on until the end of November and looked for polar bears. And so she has more days and more summer days seeing polar bears than not. Like she's got more than her fair share of polar bears already. She likes the foxes though. She's more into the foxes.
Are we talking Arctic foxes or red foxes?
We've got both. We've got both. Mostly red foxes. They're the most numerous, and so we stumble upon them quite frequently.
Um, and would you hope that she one day is going to do a similar thing to you?
When I'm old and she can just wheel me around to look at polar bears, yeah, I'd sign up for that. Oh, is she gonna have to change my diapers too? Turnabout is fair play, I guess.
I think that's fair. I think the trade-off is there. The trade-off is there.
I don't know. I just hope there are polar bears around. It was very important for me to be able to share polar bears with her. Um, like we don't know what the future holds for polar bears, and there are a lot of different opinions out there. But depending on how it goes or doesn't go, I just want to make sure she gets as much polar bear time now as humanly possible.
Well, that's pretty awesome. I think. Well, she's seen more polar bears than I have. That's still an animal I'm yet to see. Um,
Come on up.
I tell you what, if I can find the time, the cash, if I can find the time and the cash, I'm there. Um, yeah, I want to ask people if they could give themselves, their younger selves, some advice, and it could be advice to get it, into bear guide, wilderness guiding, or just general advice for life. If you could go back and give your younger self some words of wisdom, what would they be?
I well, so let's. I got to think of a concise way to say this, but um, it's fully recognize or acknowledge what you don't know. And I think there's nothing to be ashamed of in saying when somebody asks you a question, I don't know the answer. I'll find out, or I'll do a little more research. Focus on learning the bear behavior, become an expert in bearology, whatever you want to call it, and then spread the gospel of bears. Like there's so much out there right now that and wildlife conservation photography, there's so much of it that actually, in my opinion, does more harm than good if you're not doing it right. Like it's a field that needs to be done correctly if it's going to have the desired outcome. And I just see a lot of stuff out there that is done incautiously or hastily. And so take the time, do it right, uh, and you'll be successful.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And yeah, it's been absolutely wicked talking to you here.
Right on. It was my pleasure. And let's not go 3 years. You got to get up here, man.
That's absolutely a deal. Yeah, 100%.